All right, all right. So it's Monday, April 5th. I can't actually believe we're already in April. But hi, everybody. This is kind of an experiment, I guess, but I also thought it might be interesting and useful for me as well. So this is just a recording, but I may choose to do these, I think, as like live streams maybe in the future. We'll see. But as some of you know, like I just got back from I just got back from a presentation that I gave to Missouri Realtors, and the topic comes up sort of over and over again. I realize as I sort of give these talks, whether it's over Zoom or in live or just or even on I don't know, whatever the case might be. It has to do with kind of future brokerage. And I noticed something recently just going through my email logs. My future brokerage white paper that I wrote with Sunny, my recovering broker wife, a couple of years back, it gets downloaded quite a bit, and, like people I think are reading it. They think they have some questions. I think a lot of folks out there are sort of concerned about future brokerage. They're obviously going through things. They're wondering what's up. And I make the point in my presentations that one of the issues that we have kind of in residential real estate industry that really people don't want to talk about a whole lot is the fundamental problems of brokerage, which I think is why a lot of folks are downloading the paper, why a lot of folks are wondering about it. And the fundamental problem really is profitability. All right, so this is a point that I've made over the years. I keep making them. Which is say brokerages might have great revenue numbers, depends on how they report those revenues. But if you look at the actual kind of net margins or even gross margins, profitability metrics, it's all bad and it's all trending badly. So, Sonny and I have been studying this, and we, again, like a couple of years back said, hey, let's try and do something about it. We have some ideas and we put it out there. And it's in this paper. And I thought, what, it might be useful to just kind of go over that paper and maybe discuss it a little bit. If you guys find this useful and interesting, great, let me know. If not, then, let me know too. I probably will stop. But like I said, I didn't want to write a giant post about it. Thought this was easier to do. Just kind of walking through this very brief paper and just talking about it a little bit. So with that said, hopefully this will work. I better zoom in on this a little bit. All right, so this is the paper, Future Brokerage. Let me move it here. So, in case you haven't seen it, like I said, this is a free white paper. It's on my site, Notorious Rob, which I'm sure you've already. I can't imagine anyone's checking out my YouTube or Facebook if you haven't been to that site. And I know it's a little hard to read, but let me just kind of go through what the issue was as we saw it, right? Our starting point was the idea that, being a broker today is really, really difficult. It's more difficult than it's ever been. So this is a foreword that Sunny wrote. And as you see, she was a managing broker at Coldwell Banker Bain. And she's walked the walk, talked the talk. And basically it came down to sort of some main problems, right? The first is that agents are independent contractors. So brokers really can't tell them what to do, right? And the thing that she mentioned was that recruiting and retention, which are two sides of the same coin, create tension, right? So I think the basic idea there is to recruit an agent, you have to make them special deals. You have to go, offer them better splits or whatever it is. But then, your current agents find out and they want the same thing too. It's a little bit like, those... how sometimes you have like cable service and you see some promo like, sign up now and you get 3 months of HBO free. And so you call them up and say, hey, I want 3 months of HBO. And they're like, no, you're already an existing subscriber. So you get pissed. It's a little bit like that. And then the third thing that, she really pointed out was that, brokers have to make decisions that impact the entire business. But depending on sort of the structure, you're answerable to everybody, right? To the owner, maybe to corporate, maybe to individual agents. So her view was it's really terrible kind of being a broker. So what were kind of our thoughts, the future of real estate brokerage. We think, or we thought, and I still kind of believe this, that if you look at kind of historical trends that have shaped real estate brokerage, residential real estate brokerage, I think the logical endpoint of those forces is the 100% transaction fee only brokerage model, which, there are a lot of out there. Public company wise, there's Fathom Realty, but, obviously we all know the big major guys, right? HomeSmart, Realty One Group, Benchmark out in Nashville, Charles Rutenberg. I mean, there are a bunch of them. So we think that that's the logical endpoint. But, on the flip side, you have sort of the new generation of tech-powered, quote, brokerages. The example we used most was Redfin in the paper. But since we wrote this, obviously, you have Open Door and Zillow opening, quote, brokerages, very limited, but still using W-2 employee agents to provide services to at least a small segment of consumers, primarily around their iBuyer business. So what we kind of put forth was a new model, right? And it's based upon this notion right here, right? So before we even get into a new model, we just pointed out the problem, which is that the agent team is eating the brokerage. And that's a huge part of what's responsible for margin erosion, right? And frankly, the math is pretty simple. If you don't have a team, then you might have a buyer agent where you're on a 70-30 split or whatnot. The broker makes more money when that agent goes and does a deal. If that agent gets on a team, then that person is on the team split. So however you dice it, whether it's the broker takes and then the team splits, or the team splits, then the broker takes, either way, you're going to end up losing significant amount of profitability as a brokerage. And I think this is one of the real drivers of the profitability issue. We go through sort of the next wave, how they did it. I wrote a red dot paper on it, so I didn't really go into huge detail about this. But if you're curious about kind of how and why 100% brokerages work, again, go to the site. You could get the red dot paper. I think I put it on sale now because it's been a couple of years since I published it. The real deal is this, and again, you could read through some of these things, some of the dangers of these 100% models. It's sort of the race to the bottom problem. There's a potential political problem in that you have to provide, high levels of consumer protection. It's harder and harder to do. So we'll see. I mean, nothing really bad has happened. And I guess if you are a 100% broker, you're probably saying to me, like, you're crazy. I don't have any problems. We provide, in fact, better sort of oversight and better, sort of legal compliance and that sort of thing. And there's a lot of truth to that, to be honest, because the way that they centralize back office. However, it was still kind of something I saw. If there's a huge scandal and you're 100%, unless you have really rock solid compliance and oversight, you might run into some issues. So then we looked at Redfin, the employee model, and there's some others. But that's not really where the action is, right? And what I talk about when I get asked this question, on the road or, again, in presentations, I get asked this just about every time I bring up the brokerage profitability problem is, well, what do we do? So what we put forth was this idea of the professional services firm, like right here. And the idea really was that the employee model is fantastic, right, for driving productivity and for providing control in the hands of the brokerage company. The problem with it is the top producers, the really, the great agents, they just make too much money under kind of a split model, especially if the top producers are on very, very good high splits. There's just really, it's very difficult to imagine that you could pay them enough money, right, to hire them as W-2. And I think this is what most of the brokers, when they think about this, they run into that problem squarely, right? So they're thinking about their top 5, top 10 agents who they know made like $2 million in GCI, and they're going, there's absolutely no way in hell I could afford to pay them, that much. And it just makes absolutely no sense. What we put forth was this idea of kind of run the real estate brokerage like a law firm. Now, what's interesting is, like, I went back and I looked, and some of the earliest posts on Notorious Rob, like from 2009, like 2010, where I was talking about kind of the law firm as a model for real estate brokerage, right? So that's really the heart of this white paper, and it's heart of the idea that I've been pushing for a lot of years. So what is that? It's basically this, okay? Like I said, in virtually every other industry, whether it's law or investment banking, private equity, venture capital, I mean, a lot of them, we have this model of the firm, right, where you have a distinction between partners and employees, or partners and associates. So I just use law firm because that's what I'm familiar with, having worked at one, like some of I am a lawyer, retired, member of the New York Bar, although I never practiced, so I feel like, I sort of escaped that. But in any event, like the idea of a firm of equity partners along with associates or employees, and therefore under the control of the partners. So what we said was essentially take the Redfin type of W type model, but the critical change is this one right here. You take your top producing agents, the real Rainmakers, and you make them into equity partners of the brokerage. So they are, co-owners, if you will, with you as the brokerage owner, and make them partners. And it's very similar to kind of, how you become a partner in a law firm. You go from an employee associate, you work your ass off, you put in your 100 hours a week, you prove yourself, you go and get some clients, and the firm will invite you to partnership. And, as a lawyer, that's kind of like the pinnacle of your profession. That's kind of when I've made it, right? Obviously, there are some different, career paths. If you become a judge or something, you don't care about making partner. But, if you work in the sort of civilian workforce, that's really sort of how people think about it, right? Now, what's premised upon it, like our thing behind this when we sort of came up with it, and when I was thinking about it even back in the day, the idea was that you really got to focus on company dollar, right? Everything else kind of flows from that, right? So the 100% companies that we think are kind of, they're very, very successful in lots of ways, but they have zero company dollar, right? So all of their revenues, everything comes from transaction fees, it comes from ancillary services, it comes from whatever, but it has zero company dollar. Traditional brokerage has company dollars that are, obviously they're split. And the problem for them is that split has been getting steadily lower. And again, you could look at yourselves. I mean, if you're a broker, you know the deal. You know what your company dollars margins look like, whether you tell other people or not. But because we have some public companies out there that are reporting their company dollar, we kind of know, right? Realogy is their company dollar steadily declining. EXP was declining for a really long time. They kind of turned around in the last couple quarters, so good on them, good job by them. Compass, when they went public, they had to disclose their company dollar numbers, and I think those numbers are actually are a little bit inflated, but that's a whole other topic. It has to do with how you treat incentives, whether it's a marketing cost or cost of revenue. But again, like the company dollar is not great. So on average, what we saw, and this was in talking to people like Steve Murray over at Real Trends, it's about 15%, right? So really the brokerage is giving away 85 cents out of every dollar revenue to the independent contractor agents. And then you got to pay all of the sort of overhead expenses, staff, everything out of that 15%. So that's company dollar. And then two was, you don't have any control because of the whole independent contractor thing. Now, our thought was, okay, maybe you don't have control over your top producing agents, the real Rainmakers, but at least you would have control over the associates who are going to be doing a lot of the bulk of the work. So which means you can train them, you could have them implement technology, you could have them follow procedures and processes. It just made a lot of sense to us, right? Now, that only works if you are able to provide, as a brokerage company, as a firm, a level of sort of operational support, back office, if you want to call it, to the agents who are bringing in the money, so the partners, right? So this is a really important thing right here, right? Again, if you read the paper, you could check it out, but I'm just sharing it with everybody on this. What we found over the years, and I still think this is true, even to this day, and One of my closest friends is Sharon Srivatsa. He works with, some of the top agent teams and some of the top agents. You all know this. The very best agents typically are not the strongest sort of operators, right? They don't love looking at spreadsheets. They don't love dealing with procedures and processes. They love going out and meeting people. That's what makes them so successful. They're great at biz dev. They're great at client relationships. They're great at taking care of people. A lot of times they're really great at real estate. Like they're great at negotiation. They're really great at a lot of those things. But again, they don't really enjoy doing books. Like they don't enjoy, like very few people do, to be honest, right? There are people who do, but I mean, I'm not great at, the sort of the operational piece either. Like I want to go talk to every tech vendor and get it's not my thing. So the idea is that the brokerage, the firm, has to provide that sort of operational support. Kind of operates along this line a little bit aside, which recently raised a bunch of money. I think they're unicorn status now. I'm going to skip over this, but basically fundamentally what we found was this, right? Based on all the models, and we looked at traditional brokerages using the real numbers, and then we modified it so as not to identify them. This is not unusual, right? Where you have a traditional brokerage, 40 agents, a lot of agents, 540 closed units, 194 million in closed volume. I mean, that's a pretty substantial operation. GCI 4.8 million. It's again very, very substantial. But then, company dollar 874, total expenses 844. Their net income is 30 grand. That's all the profit that this fairly successful brokerage did. Versus if we're to convert that to kind of the firm model, our thinking is you end up with 5 partners, half the number of associate agents, because quite frankly, you don't need 40 agents doing like 4 transactions a year. You're much better off with 20 agents doing, many times more than that. And that productivity is really not unusual. I mean, if you go and talk to some of the W-2 teams or W-2 brokers that are out there, and there are a few, they'll routinely talk about their agents do 35, 40 transactions a year because they are required to do certain things that are, for lack of a better term, we'll call them, revenue generating activities. So anyway, so what we found was at the end of the day, because your company dollar is so much higher, even though your total expenses are higher because you're paying salaries, and those types of things, the net income is just, out of control better, right? We just think this is a better model. Again, we could get into some of the specifics, and this is a model. You'd have to look at your own situation, look at your own P&L, look at your own whatever, right? So, having said that, this is the other important thing. Based on the analysis we've done, so obviously this depends on your situation, depends on your agents. Typically, a great agent, their take-home margin is somewhere between 20 and 35% of their GCI. So even though the top line number, even for an agent, looks amazing, it's like, wow, 2 million in GCI and a 90-10 split, yeah, that's 1.8 million. But they didn't take home 1.8 million because they spent a bunch of money on marketing, on staff, on technology, office space in some cases. I mean, so we think on average, all of the teams that we looked at, we talked to, were between like 20 and 35%. Still way better than like the 3% that brokers are getting, but still, it's not the full amount, right? So what we figured is if you have multiple teams, multiple agents like that, and you consolidate sort of the operational expenses, you actually do generate some scale, you generate some efficiency. So the individual top producing agent may end up with more of a take home on a profit share of the firm as opposed to their personal GCI, right? That again depends on the agent, depends on your company, depends on the books. But the next step with something like that is really, as a broker, you have to go talk to your top producers, and you have to somehow get them to share their actual financial P&L with you. If they don't trust you, I think maybe you need to have another conversation. Like, okay, maybe you need to reevaluate your relationship with those top producers. If they do trust you, then you can have a substantive conversation. And frankly, if it doesn't work for them because of their margins or because whatever, then yeah, I mean, I guess it doesn't work for them, and it might not work for you. But it allows you to have that conversation, at least explore that path, right? So that's kind of why we put it. And there's a whole bunch of other things like value proposition, culture, millennials. Like the culture millennials thing, I think is sort of interesting. And the only thing I'd sort of mention about that is when we were doing this, what we discovered is it's very, very hard to have a culture. And that's something that every brokerage, every company, frankly, tries to do. It's hard to do that if you have a bunch of 1099s who just tell you to go pound sand, right? Whereas if you have employees, you have a little bit more of a team environment. You have a little bit more of an ability to create and enforce a culture. On the millennial thing, quite frankly, most millennials, again, I suppose the older millennials are kind of in their mid to late 30s, so it's starting to change. But a lot of them just are not in a position to be able to take a job that doesn't pay anything. It's not even a job, really. I mean, you got to start your own business is what it comes down to. I guess we can now translate that down to the younger people are generating, graduating now, so the Gen Z or the Zoomers. I mean, there aren't many 23-year-olds that could afford to come in and work their ass off and not get paid for 6 to 8 months. I mean, it just doesn't, it's not feasible. As a result, if you were to pay them a salary, though, as an associate, bring them in, do the training, get their feet wet, start putting them through I guess we'll call it an apprenticeship because that's sort of what it's like, but you're paid, so you could recruit a lot more of them. Frankly, and we didn't write this when we wrote the paper, it occurs to me that logic also applies if you're going for more sort of like racial economic diversity, right? Again, like if you're saying, we need more Black or Hispanic realtors in our brokerage to work a particular neighborhood, but it's like, well, how many people can afford to come on board and not get paid for 8 months? Not that many. Well, if you want to increase that percentage, maybe it would help if you were to pay them a salary. So bring them on as associates. There are lots of other benefits, total control over data. You're the broker, you own all the data. These are employees, all of their stuff, their work product belongs to you. There's sorts of things like that. And we ended it there. So I just thought I'd go over this paper because, like I said, a number of you that have heard me speak or other things, you're curious about it, you're interested, you've downloaded it. And I just thought it might be, useful to just record this short video kind of going over what that is. Obviously, as you know, this is not a live stream, so I can't take questions. But practicing, this whole video thing, see how that goes. If you have any questions, any thoughts, feel free to put it in the comments. I don't know where I'm going to post this yet, but, probably put it on YouTube and Facebook and whatever. So, yeah, feel free to post your thoughts and comments and reach out. If I could help, then I'd be happy to help. I don't have to. Like I said, I kind of laid out the model, laid out the next steps. So let me actually talk about that very briefly, because most of you aren't, you're not going to be able to like hire us to come in and help you. Like that's not the goal here. The goal here is to help you figure out what you might be able to do, as you think down this path. I think the next steps are these. And by the way, people do ask me who else has done this, and the answer is no one at the brokerage level that I know of. And I've talked to a number of y'all, and most of you can't do this for a couple reasons. Number one, you don't have the money, right? Because you need at least 6 months of operating expenses, including salaries, in order to try this. And real estate is cyclical. That's number one. Number two, a lot of you feel like you can't really have that conversation with the top producing agents because you're afraid of losing them. They'll get freaked out and they'll be like, oh my God, like, you're moving to this like employee thing. I'm not working for anybody. I get it. So there's that. And then three, in some cases, you do have the issue of, how do I put this nicely? Well, screw nicely. Frankly, a lot of the top producing agents, as we all know, are egomaniacs. Some ways that's healthy because you have to have that self-confidence in order to go and be an effective salesperson. Other cases, not that healthy. So it's hard to get those top producing agents in a room with you to kind of agree on things, and that's what's required in order to form a partnership. Now, it's difficult, but again, I think about the fact that you have lawyers. Talk about egomaniacs, right? Talk about difficult personalities. Like you have lawyers getting together in a room and coming to agreements. So do I look at it, if lawyers can do it? Certainly, I think real estate agents can do it. It's a matter of wanting to. Having said all that, um, if I were interested, if I'd read this paper and I wanted to kind of take the next steps, what would I be recommending? I think the first thing you do is you kind of have to do the numbers for the company, right? So for yourself, like, what are my operating expenses? How much? What are my splits? And look at it, across your entire agent base, do the productions, like really do some analysis on it, and figure out what is your current sort of gross margins in another's company dollar, net margins, what are the expenses, what am I spending money on, where's any sort of potential for improvement, but also what do I have in terms of that operational support, right? Because as a broker, you might be a working broker, which makes you more like a teamerage, or you might be a non-selling broker, which means you're really more of that manager. You're really that operating partner. You have to kind of figure out, what do I have that I can sort of add to this, right? So that's number one. Two, I do think it's probably worth, at that point, the second step is you have to talk to your top producers, right? And you have to talk to the people that are rainmakers. Now, let me define that, because I get asked this question a bunch. A rainmaker I define as an agent who is generating enough business to feed herself as well as others, right? So if you just have a top producer who's doing like whatever 30 transactions and they've got a sphere, but they're able to just kind of stay busy for just themselves, that's not a rainmaker. A rainmaker has to be able to generate excess. So the best sort of classic example, I think, it comes out of agent teams. It would be the agent who is like a super strong listing agent. So they want to spend all their time going on listing appointments and listing houses. And then that listing and their activities just generates a ton of buyer inquiries, and they don't want to work with buyers because buyers are liars. It's a pain in the ass. You got to drive them around. It sucks. So they go and then hire or put a bunch of buyer agents on their team. That's a rainmaker, right? In other words, they're generating enough business to feed themselves and others. It has to be at least one other. Obviously, you got to think about like what number that makes sense. So the second thing, first is do your financials. Second, look at your roster and kind of figure out who your rainmakers are and who are not your rainmakers. Then I think I would look at the people who are not your rainmakers and figure out which of those people are great service providers, but they're not great at the biz dev, because there are a lot of agents who are like this. They're wonderful at taking care of a customer. Like they are actually really great at client service. They're knowledgeable about real estate. They know the contract. They know negotiation. They know the market. They know there are a lot of folks like this, but they just really hate doing business development. They hate doing lead gen work. They hate calling their sphere. They hate knocking on doors, whatever. They just really don't want to do that. But if you were to hand them a client, they're wonderful. So I think you want to identify kind of that group, and then the folks who maybe aren't there yet. Maybe they're new, maybe they're part-time, maybe they're not as committed. They're not as great at the service delivery. I think you really want to sort of distinguish that. Because chances are, under a salary model, you're not keeping these folks. You might keep a few of the really great service delivery people as associates. You're likely not keeping the people who are just, they're just not very good, right? And they're not doing lead gen, and they're not that personality, and they're not great at service delivery either. So why do you keep them, right? Under a split model, you keep them because it doesn't cost you anything until they do a deal. So it's just sort of like money falling in your lap. Why not? Under a firm model, you can't afford to keep them. So I would do some sort of segmentation, if you will. And then finally, you got to go talk to those rainmakers and get their numbers and try and figure out, does this make sense? Not just for you, but for them, right? Now, if what the numbers suggest, the pro forma numbers suggest, is that they're potentially going to make less money as a partner in the brokerage firm versus as an independent contractor on a split, I wouldn't necessarily give up hope, because one of the things you discover is a lot of these team leaders form teams, and get to a point where they don't really want to be actively like working anymore. You know what I mean? Like they want to do the lead gen. They want to still talk to their clients. They still want to do those things. They certainly don't want to deal with any operational stuff. They don't want to be looking at financials. They don't want to be looking at books. They don't want to be having conversations with tech vendors about implementation or whatever, right? They don't want to be getting involved with hiring and firing and tax issues. Like they just don't want to do any of that. They want to focus on what they want to focus on, which is business development, talking to their clients, getting listings, like whatever it is. So it may be that if you could provide enough value where they don't have to do stuff that they don't want to do and they could focus on things that they really do want to do, some of them might be willing to accept that. Even though on paper it says I'm going to go from taking home 300,000 to 200,000, it might be worth it for them to be like, you know what though, by removing a lot of this sort of operational not my highest and best use stuff off my plate, I'm going to be able to go and get more listings. I'm going to be able to do more business. So I'm actually okay with it. I mean, that's up to that agent. That's up to you. But that's why I wouldn't necessarily give up if the numbers on a pro forma basis don't really work out. Still have a conversation. You never know, because you don't have to decide to do anything until you all, as a partnership, decide to do something. There's some other details, obviously. If you want, give me a ring or drop me a line. I'd be happy to talk you through some of those. But I think those 3 phases are sort of the next steps if you decide that this is something you want to explore. And I think you should explore because, quite frankly, the fundamental problem with brokerage today is profitability. There aren't that many strategies for assisting with that. I mean, the dominant ones right now are essentially recruit and retain more, which I'm not sure how that helps profitability on a margin basis. It might help absolute profits, like absolute dollars, but on a percent basis, it's not necessarily an improvement. And the other one is ancillary business, title, escrow, mortgage. And the only thing I want to point out about that is, well, literally everybody in the industry is now going after title, escrow, mortgage, insurance, ancillary business. I mean, literally Compass's entire kind of value proposition business model, it's in their S1, talks about like the Compass flywheel effect and how the agents at the center of this economic universe, like everybody's doing this, everybody's going after it. So, is that some sort of a competitive differentiator? I don't know. All right. In any event, that's it. Just figured I'd record a video. I know it's already like half an hour, but if you read my stuff, I don't think that should shock you. I could probably do 4-hour Joe Rogan podcast if I wanted to. So, yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching, and let me know what you think. I mean, is this useful? Is this something I should do more of or less of? You tell me. And like I said, if you have any questions, drop me a line. Thanks, y'all. Bye.